Hello. Hi, everybody. I think there's a bit of a delay, so we're going to wait until I appear live. Hello. Hi, everybody. I think there's a bit of a delay, so we're going to wait until I appear live. Okay, it looks like we okay, it looks like we're live and we're ready to go. So thank you everybody for chiming in today. It looks like we only have about 9 people here right now. Certainly there will be more people who will join us as this sort of is broadcast over YouTube and people get notified. The first thing that I'd like to say for those of you who are on our email list, you know that we sent out a notice about recent events, what's going on in our country, and the recent police brutality events and the deaths that have happened, the murders really that have happened, and we just want to let everybody know that we support peaceful protests and we are really deeply saddened by everything that is happening in this country, but we also know that the future is bright, and while there really needs to be some major systemic reform in our country, we look to all of you to help make that happen. And one of the reasons why I certainly love working with with students and with pre-medical students and current medical students is because you all are so idealistic and you have such great vision for the future. And so I know that all of you are going to ultimately become physicians and you're going to contribute in a really significant and meaningful way. And, that really gives tremendous hope for all of us. So anyway, so everyone, welcome to tonight's office hours, and I apologize for the cancellations. We had to cancel for technical reasons on Monday, and then yesterday we didn't want to have office hours because it was Blackout Tuesday, and so we wanted to respect that. So welcome, and I will start tonight just because it doesn't look like we have all that many people here yet. So I'm going to start by answering the questions that are in the chat, and also by discussing some of the questions that we have been getting here at the office a lot. And, so I'm going to talk about some of those things just because when people call us and they have questions and they're signing up for free consultations with us, we kind of understand what people's, primary concerns are right now. So, so we're going to go over some of those topics as well. So the first question is, can you please discuss how many and how to make a list of medical schools is if I do not have, I think you mean your MCAS scores yet, and my GPA is 3.8 cum, 3.72 science. So what we would recommend when you're making a school list without yet having your MCAT scores is, you probably have an idea of what your MCAT is likely to be based on your practice tests, okay? And you should start making a school list based on where your practice tests are. So where you sort of expect to be when you take your MCAT. Now, when you submit your AMCAS application, you will choose medical schools to which you will be applying. However, you can then add schools once you actually get your MCAT score back. So when we are working with students, what we do is we select schools based on where we expect their MCAT to be, and we look at their state residency, we look at their GPA and their extracurricular activities, and then we will come up with a an initial list that we will then go back and we will modify once we actually know what the MCAT is, right? So you can submit your AMCAS application even with just one medical school, and that will get your application processed, it'll get it verified, and then it will be sent to that one medical school. And then once you know your MCAT score, you can then add on those schools. Now, if your application has been verified, by the time you add on those additional schools, it's just going to go straight to those schools. So there's no waiting time. So this is why it's safe to submit an application with, maybe just your state schools or a few target schools, and then you can then add on later. So that's a really good question. This is a common question, and this is an especially common scenario this year because so many students are taking later MCAT exams. And so certainly there are going to be more students in this sort of category than there have been in years past, actually. Okay. How soon should we have all letters prepared? And can we add letters to a school we already submitted to? Okay, so you ideally want to have all of your letters of recommendation in before your application is actually transmitted to medical schools. And this year that's happening on July 10th, which I think everyone knows at this point. So whether or not you can add a letter of recommendation to AMCAS, certainly, and some medical schools will actually accept letters of recommendation sent to them directly. Not all schools will allow for additional materials that are sent to them directly, but many will. And this is something that we will often recommend that our students do while they're applying, if they have additional letters of recommendation and they're kind of honing in on, one or two schools where maybe they've interviewed or they're waitlisted and they're really interested in. So ideally, you want to have all those letters in by the time your application is transmitted to medical schools, and at the very latest, you want them sent in by the time your secondary essays have actually been sent into all of your medical schools. Okay, so something I actually want to talk about with regards to timeline, and this, is a question that we've been getting as well, because people are asking a lot about when they should be submitting their application. And the answer is as soon as you can, but this year there definitely is much more leeway with regards to the actual submission date, because medical schools are allowing for later MCAT dates. And so they are allowing, they're actually holding spots for interviews for students who are taking those later MCAT dates. So it's important to keep in mind that when you submit your application, that sort of is point one. But then point two is when it's then transmitted to medical schools. And then after your application is transmitted to medical schools, that's when you will start getting your secondary applications and your request for secondary essays. Now, your application is only going to be reviewed by medical school admissions committees once your secondary essays have been received by those medical schools. So oftentimes students will make the mistake of working very, very hard, getting their primary application submitted very early, and then either because they're tired or they sort of don't understand the process, they then drag their feet on secondary essays, and they therefore end up, in essence, being a late applicant when they thought, oh my gosh, I got my primary in, on the first opening day, and and then they sort of have undermined all of that hard work to get their application in very, very early, and because they submit late secondary. So keep in mind that your application is only going to actually be reviewed and looked at once your secondary applications and your secondary essays have actually been sent to medical schools. TMD SAS told me to make an addendum to bring to an interview. What are your thoughts on this? I'm wondering if you actually could send that to me, what exactly they said to you. I would think it's a little bit early to actually be offering that information, but if you want to send me what TMDSAS actually told you, and you could just email that to info@mededits.com. We certainly encourage students to send medical schools updates, as they happen, but that usually doesn't happen until a little bit after applications have been submitted. So, even, the earliest that usually there are significant updates to send would be in the early fall. So maybe that's what they mean by an addendum. But I'm not really sure. That's the first that I've ever heard about TMD SAS asking you to bring an addendum to an interview, but that may be what they're referring to. Yeah, AACOMAS transmits applications in June. So I'm not sure what information you got from AACOMAS that they send verified applications immediately. If this was a verbal conversation with AACOMAS, maybe that was someone who wasn't fully informed. I don't know. Someone else asked how many applications were submitted on the first day/week since the application opened. Nobody knows. They don't really disclose this information. We do go to the AMC meetings, so we're up to date on what they're telling students. We do know that a much larger percentage of applicants started applications this year within the first week than has happened in past years, but they don't actually disclose how many applications they receive and how many they process. That information doesn't come out till much later, and at least up until now, they haven't actually disclosed when those applications come in. TMDSAS actually does a much better job at kind of breaking down. That's the Texas application system. They do a much better job breaking down kind of when applications come in and which of those sort of blocks of time, which results in the most interviews. And it is, obvious that the students who submit earlier applications tend to get earlier interviews. How long does it take to get secondaries? You're not really going to find that information online. Typically, secondaries will be sent out within 2 weeks of receipt of an application. So medical school applications are, as you know, for AMCAS, they are going to be sent to medical schools on the earliest July 10th. So we anticipate that secondary essays usually aren't sent until 2 weeks after that date. However, because this is a little bit later than what medical schools have previously been accustomed to, it's possible that they may be sending out those secondaries a little bit sooner upon receipt of those primary applications. But Mahola, that really varies from school to school, when a school actually gets a primary application and then when they start extending secondaries. That is really a very, school specific question. And it isn't always so kind of consistent necessarily, but most students will receive their secondaries within 2 weeks of their application being transmitted to a medical school. Okay, do you need to know any specific code languages like Python, Java, or SQL that will look good on a resume when applying to BSMD programs? Not necessarily. Not everybody, depending on where they go to high school. This is a BSMD student who's looking to go to an accelerated program, a BSMD program. Not all students have access to computer science classes. Certainly for those of you who are really interested in research, especially depending on the type of research, being fluent in any number of coding languages can obviously be a tremendous benefit, depending on the type of research you are doing. So this is something to think about, obviously, for the summer, right? With everyone having more time on their hands this summer, and with there being so many online course offerings, both at the high school level and at the college level, this certainly could be a summer to consider maybe learning a new computer language or taking, an introductory computer science class or a next level computer science class, because certainly being fluent in computer languages is something that can only be a tremendous asset, as you move through in your education. And I just wouldn't be surprised if in, a certain number of years, if that fluency is almost expected of students, as computer science becomes sort of more a set part of high school and college, maybe college curriculums. So Matthew asks, how formally should we be writing the COVID essays? And Matthew, I assume that you are referring specifically to the AACOMAS COVID essay. The AACOMAS application has a specific COVID essay. However, I know that many of the allopathic medical schools will also be having a COVID essay to find out what you've been doing during COVID. And so, with all secondary essays or very prompt specific essays, we encourage you to be formal unless that essay calls for a little bit of creativity, right? So whenever you're writing any type of secondary essay, and I consider a COVID essay, even on the primary app for AACOMAS, to be sort of more along the lines of a secondary, you really want to read that prompt and you want to answer as directly as possible. One of the biggest mistakes that students make when writing their essays, especially secondary essays, is they don't read the prompt carefully and they don't really answer the question directly. So we will certainly be doing more on secondary essays as this season progresses. Once we start seeing what all of the secondary essays are for medical schools in this upcoming season, just in case there are any changes because of COVID. This would be the year that maybe some schools would change their secondary essay prompts because of that. So once we see what those changes are, we certainly will be doing, more, YouTube lives, maybe even some more specific YouTube videos on secondary essay prompts and how to address those prompts. In your experience, how are DACA students viewed as MD and PhD applicants? You have to review, you can see on MSAR what the medical schools DACA policies are, and so I would go to that and foresee what their what their policies are on DACA students. And certainly I don't think that they are perceived negatively or positively. I think your candidacy is viewed, on par with everybody else's, assuming that those schools take DACA students. So there's a question about Casper, and I love this question because there's a lot of buzz out there about Casper, and students get so worked up about it because they think it's a difficult test. First of all, it's not really a test. It's something called a situational judgment test, where you are given situations, everyday situations that do not relate to medicine, and you are asked to respond to those by answering 3 specific prompts. You're allowed very, very little time to answer these prompts. On the MedEdits team, we have people who were in admissions offices where Casper was used. We're also in touch with admissions offices where we understand how Casper is used to evaluate students. And we know people who are Casper raters. And I can tell you that unless you write something that is really offensive on Casper, so you write something racist or sexist, or just really blatantly offensive, it's very difficult to do badly on Casper. Okay, the only thing that we recommend is taking the practice Casper test that is offered by, I think it's Altus, the company that right now is administering Casper. Take that practice test, more so that you can understand what the test is about, what is the format of the test, how much time do you have for each question. It's very, very little. The Casper raters that we know, they say it's very tough to really grade people really well on Casper, just because even the best students only have time to write about 2 sentences for each question. So don't stress about Casper. It is not used as a screening. It is not used as something that is going to make or break your candidacy by any stretch. It is used together with all of the other information that they have about you, from letters of recommendation, from your interview, from what you've written about in your documents, and they just want to make sure that your Casper score or your Casper performance is sort of consistent with everything else that they read about you. Casper is an online test. Yes, Matthew. So it's something you take online. And, just so everyone knows, and I realize this isn't applicable to the people who are applying this year, but the AMC has created their own situational judgment test that is being used this year at 2 different medical schools. And so students who are applying to those schools, I think it's going to end up being like about 10,000 applicants. And it's a California school, and it's I forget the other school, but anyway, I anticipate that assuming that that pilot goes well this year, that next year maybe that will be extended to all medical schools in the United States, and that so the AMC will just start to take this on internally, and those scenarios, it's a little bit of a different test, a bit of a different format than Casper. Those scenarios are sort of more medically relevant, even though you don't necessarily need to have any medical knowledge to take that test, obviously. How does one reach AMCAS? Yeah, so it's interesting. We are finding that AMCAS is doing a great job this year verifying applications. So our students, MedEdits students, are getting verified in, anywhere from 2 to 3 days. So they've really been verifying very quickly and really in record speed this year. So that's good news. Okay. However, we are hearing that it's very difficult this year to get in touch with AMCAS, which in the past has not been an issue. In the past, it's been very, very easy to get in touch with AMCAS, and they pick up the phone and answer questions very promptly. So there's no magic way to get in touch with AMCAS. And I realize the frustration. Certainly some of our students are having this frustration as well. And if you need to reach out to AMCAS and you need to, get in touch with them, I would just suggest you keep trying to call them. It's interesting that AMCAS and the AMC and the MCAT are actually, they're all fairly active on Twitter, I find. So if you're really having a lot of difficulty, you might want to try to write to them on Twitter and ask them, I'm trying to reach you. I have a transfer question. What would be the most efficient way for me to get in touch? So that's, but we're definitely hearing this from our students, that verifications are happening really, really fast. Another great reason why students should be leaning towards applying this year. And we can talk a little bit more about that, because we're definitely getting a lot of questions about whether, should I or should I not apply this year? What's the latest I can take my MCAT? We're getting a lot of questions of that nature during our free consultations. So we can talk more about that. Let me see. I was told by a medical school that all TMD-SAS schools have agreed to accept and begin reviewing applications before they get the latest MCAT score. Would this help a student with a late MCAT date? I'm going to have to, I wonder if that's been noted on their website, Robert. I'm going to have to look that up, because that's new if all schools have agreed to do this. So schools are, based on my understanding, they're doing this in different ways. So there are some medical schools who are going to be reviewing applications before MCATs are in, and they're going to be obviously doing a more holistic review of those applications. Okay. And so I'm going to look, Robert, when we're done with this live, to see if TMD-SAS has announced something that I'm unaware of. And then some medical schools are reviewing applications holistically without MCAT scores, if those MCAT scores are coming in later, or if students have repeat MCAT scores that are pending. But what the AMC said, and obviously that might be different than TMD-SAS, which is only for Texas schools. But what the AMC is saying is that, medical schools are going to be, not extending all of their interviews, as quickly. So they're basically going to be holding interview slots for students who they know will be applying and who they know will be receiving their MCAT scores later. So, certainly I think, the bottom line is that all medical schools, whether TMD-SAS, AACOMAS, AMCAS, all schools this year are being as flexible and as open as they can be. They understand what a challenging situation COVID has presented. They know that everyone's activities have been canceled, and that people haven't been able to do this summer what they originally intended. And certainly they also understand the issue with the MCAT. So the medical schools and all of those umbrella organizations, like the AMC, are trying to be as understanding as they can be, and they're actually making this as easy and as open. They're being very open-minded this year in a way that certainly I've never seen. So that's really great. On the residency side of things, it's going to be a little bit more specialty specific in terms of how different specialties are going to be dealing with the upcoming application season. Some specialties are going to be limiting the number of letters of reference that they're allowing students to submit that are specialty specific. Away rotations have been canceled, so some specialties are also limiting the number of rotations that students are going to be allowed to do in their given specialty. So, but that's all very specialty specific, and not all specialties have sort of come forth with really clear guidelines for residency applicants. So that's something that we need to sort of, wait and see what happens. Oh, Robert Sanchez, it was mentioned during a UTMB webinar. Okay, I'm gonna look that up, and we will get back to you. If you want to email us again, info@mededits.com. I'm gonna do my best to find out that information, and we'll get back to you. How will TMD SAS verify our applications without our transcripts? They're asking to send those transcripts sometime in August upon emailing us for them. They can't verify your application without transcripts. I'm not completely sure what that means. They obviously have to have your transcripts in order to verify your application. So again, it seems like TMDSS is doing some things that I'm not aware of. So we're gonna go back and we're gonna review what their current policies are. I started virtual shadowing, and will be doing it all summer. I only have 1 hour so far. I was planning on submitting my application next week. How do I put that in my activity section? So Kevin, you should be able to enter your virtual shadowing in your activities. You want to, approximate what that end date will be. With the best of your knowledge, it sounds like it'll just be a summer activity. So you want to explain, when we have students who are just starting activities, or maybe activities that will be starting in the future, and this is, now allowed with COVID, we want you to sort of say, I just started a virtual shadowing program. And, while it just started, this is what I hope to gain and what I hope to learn from that experience, so that you kind of let the admissions committees know, what you're anticipating from that experience, what the overall plan is, but also what you hope to learn and how that's going to better position you when you apply to medical school. And I've heard more about these virtual shadowing programs, and it'll be interesting to see how useful those are. So if you could let us know that would be great. I'd love to hear about it and who it's through as well. Okay, so Dorsai asks a great question. If an activity involves leadership, publication, and presentation, which category should it be placed in? And I'm actually about to put up a video about this, because activities like this do sort of comprise multiple categories, okay? So when you have an activity that comprises multiple categories, you should choose the category that sort of is, let's say, underrepresented in your application, if that makes sense. So like, let's say you have five other publications, right? Then you obviously don't need another publication category. But let's say you have no leadership category, you might want to include under leadership, right? The category you choose, and we really encourage our students not to get kind of too worked up about categories, because categories are self-determined, and the vast majority of experiences can fall under several different categories, right? So the people reading your application, yes, they look at what category you've entered, but they read through the experience, so they get an understanding of what that experience really involves, and then they kind of make up their own categories in their head, right? So like, if you did a research experience, you had a research experience, like, so I was talking to one student today who had this amazing research experience, which involved obviously research, but it also involved patient exposure, because she was interviewing patients, and and it also involved shadowing, because the physician she was working with, let her shadow, and a lot of the experience also involved direct patient contact. So that's an experience that, while it sort of was under, the main category is research, it involved all these other categories as well. So when someone is reading your application, they're going to read the details of your experience, certainly with 700 characters, assuming it's not a most meaningful in your AMCAS, you have plenty of space to detail what experience was about and what it involved. And that way you can really give a full picture of everything that, that you achieved and everything that you accomplished during that activity. Okay, what to do about those who are unable to take the MCAT, Chioma asks. And we've been getting a lot of questions about the MCAT. I know, a lot of our students are getting emails saying, we're anticipating the possibility that your MCAT date, may need to be changed because, based on what's going on in your area, we don't expect your area to be opened up, by June, whatever. And, so if you have to change your MCAT date, because wherever you're living, the testing centers are not opening up yet, that is completely okay. Like I have said, medical schools understand that, that people are shifting their MCAT dates around, that there will be cancellations, there will be more cancellations, and the medical schools are being extremely accommodating for applicants who will be taking late MCATs, and they understand that. So, again, we don't want this to sort of deter people from applying this year. If you're ready to apply, if you're ready to take the MCAT, if it was sort of in your overall game plan to apply this year, and there's no reason that you should shift that game plan based on your inability to take your MCAT when you initially had planned to do it. Yeah, Kevin Harris, everybody wants to know about your program, it looks like. I do too. We had somebody else who mentioned a virtual shadowing program to us, and I think there are more and more programs that are attempting, to do these types of innovative initiatives, because students really are quite upset about having activities canceled and things. Okay, so I'm gonna answer a couple questions that were emailed to us as well. Someone asked what the best way to study for the MCAT is, and about resources, but because they're trying to plan ahead. Now, how you study for the MCAT is really a personal choice. What we often ask students is, well, how did you study for your SAT or your ACT, which is typically the most recent exam that students have taken. And, and that should sort of give you a benchmark for how you study for a standardized test, what works for you. If you did, most pre-med students did pretty well on their high school, the standardized test they took in high school. So first look at what worked for you when you took that exam. Do you do well with a course because it keeps you structured? Do you do better with a tutor? Are you a good self-studier? Okay, we find that the vast majority of students usually do well with a combination of resources. So for example, some students do well by initially, let's say, taking a standardized course. We do not find that there is much variation between courses. Okay, this is still a finite amount of material. It doesn't change. It's not creative material. So we encourage students to take a well-reputed and well-established MCAT course. There obviously are many, many people now who are in the MCAT, tutoring / test prep sphere. So, we really encourage students to talk to previous students who have taken those courses to find out what the plus minuses were. Because you certainly don't want to be taking a course that is not well developed and hasn't kind of, been tested by the marketplace. So we find that most students will do well either by taking a standardized course or by self-studying. And then depending on how they're doing, they then will do some targeted tutoring, in specific sections where they need help. We have certainly worked with students who only do a course, who only self-study, who only, do tutoring, so this is really a personal choice. And again, we don't find that most of the commercial materials that are out there are very variable. Now, of course, we do have some MCAT tutors, that we refer for our students who need MCAT tutors, and the MCAT tutors who really know the MCAT and who've been doing this for a long time, they do see variations in the different testing materials and books. And we, of course, can get those recommendations if you'd like them. There are some materials that are very good for sort of a broad overview. There are some materials that are better for students who really maybe are weak on a specific subject and need to dive deeper into that subject because they need to improve their score in a specific section. So there will be some variations among the bigger testing commercially available testing resources out there. Okay. Okay, so someone who's majoring in data science is eager to apply to medical school. A lot of my extracurriculars have ended up involving data science, and I know that research experience is necessary for medical school. I've just finished my sophomore year. Is there anything I can look into to make sure that I have a chance of being a well-rounded applicant? And again, this all relates to a video that I'm going to be putting up, later this week, maybe even tomorrow, about experiences, the best pre-medical experiences. So having a lot of experience in research is a very positive thing. Okay. In looking back at our students who have ended up going to top 20 medical schools, most of them, actually all of them, have had extensive experience in at least one of the three major categories of experiences that you need for medical school admissions. Those three categories being research, physician shadowing, or patient exposure, or community service of some sort. Okay, now people don't have thousands of hours in physician shadowing because the boredom would kill them, because most pre-med students really can, they get bored after just shadowing and not really having, their hands in there. But certainly if you're a scribe or if you're an EMT, that you can accumulate a lot of really valuable hours of, great hands-on clinical experience that way. So if you've been doing, let's say, 2 years of research, that's wonderful. And that then becomes what we call your spike in the medical school admissions process. And then you also want to have some experience in patient exposure, whether that be hands-on patient care or shadowing. And you definitely want some experience in community service. And those experiences can come in many different ways, whether that's through teaching, whether that's through mentoring, working at a crisis hotline. There are any number of ways that you can get community service experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be directly related to medicine. Okay, and again, you should subscribe to our channel and look for that video, because I'm going to be addressing a lot of this in that video: how many hours you need, how many hours we advise, how many hours you need if you're sort of, aiming for top tier schools. Miguel asked a question about, did the AMC change their policy for future activities that didn't happen? So I don't know if they've officially announced this on their website. You should be able to log into your application and enter future activities. So the reason that they did this, and this was mentioned at an AMC meeting that we went to, that they want students to be entering future activities that didn't happen because of COVID, but will still be happening, later on. So I don't know that was necessarily in print anywhere on the AMC website, but this was something that was discussed at a meeting that we went to. And so we have to look and see if that's actually in print on their website somewhere. I definitely am finding that sometimes, these things that are happening and are being discussed in various forums are not necessarily, being put in print in anywhere sort of where it should be, so to speak. So some of this you kind of have to figure out once you get into the system. And actually, I'm going to put that on my list of things to do to log into an AMC application and make sure that that's an option. But it should be. They said it's an option, and I know that's what we've been advising our students. I have the option of doing honors research work at my college. I have to write a thesis at the culmination of the class. Are these good types of research credit? Is this type of research credit good? Yes. So as long as you are doing independent research with a faculty member, it is okay if you're getting credit for that research. So research that is sort of part of a class does not qualify as research, right? But if you're doing independent honors research where you're, coming up with a hypothesis, you're testing that hypothesis, you're doing all the work, and you're writing a thesis at the end of the class, that's independent research. So even though you're getting that credit, so that certainly counts, absolutely. Okay, do you have any advice for virtual interviews? Yeah, so virtual interviews are definitely happening this season. It seems as though, everyone has agreed that there will be no in-person interviews. And, and obviously this is something that we've been prepping students for years, because all of our mock interviews we do virtually. So I would recommend that you practice, even if that's just with a family member, just so you're kind of comfortable. I think all of us, during this pandemic have become much more comfortable with Zoom. You obviously want to dress professionally. You don't want to be looking at your phone. You want to be attentive. This is also, there's going to be a learning curve and sort of, a comfort or discomfort among your interviewers as well with this whole process. So it's going to be, I think, initially a little bit weird for everybody, right? Until everyone kind of gets comfortable with it. I also expect that interview days, you're going to have introductions to a program. You're going to meet the deans virtually, and they're even saying that they're going to be doing MMI interviews virtually. So schools that traditionally had MMIs are going to try to do those by having various breakout rooms. So that's certainly going to be interesting. So, in terms of virtual interviews, just treat it like a real interview, right? Do your best to kind of pretend you're sitting in the office with that person, and just like with any interview, you don't want to memorize responses. You want to be as natural and authentic as you can be, and you want to be personable. So I do think there are going to be some people who virtual interviews are going to be great for. There might be some people who are really great interpersonally that maybe that won't come through as strongly on a virtual interview. So, it depends on sort of what category, you fit into there. So yeah, just mostly just be yourself, be natural, try not to, it's sometimes I think it's tougher for people to be natural when they're, in a virtual setting, because you don't kind of have all of that, all of the, you don't get lunch, you don't get to sit and talk with people. So sometimes it's a little more difficult, but for other people, it could be easier. Okay. I put my class lab research as a research experience. We had a presentation and put many hours into it. Will you be flagged? So no, you're not going to be flagged. It's very tough as a student to know which experiences you're supposed to put in and which you're not. So no, this is not going to be flagged in any way. A lot of students do this, and you're fine, Blue Q. There's no worries there. Can we include the articles that are in the process of publishing under publication? We would encourage you, if those aren't yet published, because if they're published, they're going to want a formal citation. So it's probably better to put that in the research entry for that publication and say, I'm writing, we're in the process of writing an article that has been accepted for publication, and we're expected for it to be published in, whatever date. I did volunteer mentoring for high school juniors and seniors, but I didn't do it through a center. Should I just put in contacts for the parents of the students? Okay, so when you're entering contacts for experiences, and again, this is sort of one of these things like categories, don't get hung up on who the contacts were. So if you're mentoring, yes, I think it would be fine to put down as a contact one of the parents of one of the students, or you could even put yourself down as that contact if it's something that you organized on your own. Okay. Okay, so someone else sent us an email about early decision, and if I were not applying to any other medical schools in that year, I applied this cycle, but I am on 2 wait lists. It's looking as though I might need to reapply. I'm intending to do the Drexel master's program, and I was wondering if it's worth applying ED to one school this year. Early decision is very risky for the vast majority of students. And why is that? It's because when you apply early decision to one school, it makes you late for all your other medical schools. Now, in this current climate with COVID, it might not be as risky as in years past, because again, medical schools are sort of pushing out their deadlines, and they're extending interviews later in the process, and so the entire process gets pushed back a bit. But generally speaking, applying early decision is something that should be reserved for students who really have a great shot getting into one specific school, and maybe they even have a connection at that school. Otherwise, it does tend to be something that we discourage students from doing. What are your views on tele rotations? Will they stand up as robust as in-person rotation? So this relates to sort of a residency question. Of course, tele rotations are not going to be as robust as in-person rotations, but there's nothing you can do. You know, different medical schools are now letting their students back into the hospitals for rotations. If you're forced to do rotations, there's nothing you can do. This is an especially difficult situation for students who are applying to residency in the upcoming cycle. I think for third years, you know, by the time all of this, you know, I think, you know, by the time we have a vaccine and by the time sort of COVID has kind of, you know, calm down a bit and everyone can sort of get back into their normal routines, you know, it's obviously not going to be an issue. But if you have no other option but to do a tele rotation, there's really nothing you can do. And, you know, you have to realize again that everyone's in the same boat. All the students are having tele rotations. They're having their rotations canceled. They're having away rotations canceled. So everybody is completely in the same boat with all of this. I did 300 hours of clinical work in high school and about 80 of those hours in college. Is it okay to list all 300 hours in my application? Assuming it was an experience that started in high school and extended into college, yes, I think it's fine to include the 380 hours in total. Generally speaking, we recommend that students do not include high school experiences in their medical school application unless it was a really exceptional experience, you know, that was really distinguishing in some capacity. But if you're talking about an experience that started in high school and then, you know, you continued on into college, then I think that is certainly something that's completely acceptable to include. Okay, so I think we are going to call it a night. And I thank you all for participating tonight. And certainly, you know, I hope that you will continue to tune into these office hours. If there's anything you feel would be more helpful for you, or anything additional that we can offer you, you know, all of the students this year, you know, please email us info. We're always info@mededits.com. We are always looking for suggestions and ideas of how we can assist students and what we can do to help. And, you know, and I thank you. I hope everyone stays healthy and well. And should you choose to protest, do so peacefully. And may our country, you know, be in a better place sooner rather than later. Okay, so thank you all and good night.